Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Overview and Scrutiny Committee. We have a long agenda, so if we could keep to time and keep our questions to the point and not too long, that would be very helpful. Thank you. I'd also like to thank Mark Bainham, Colette Blackburn and John Olson, Cabinet members, who have come along to speak about their various bits on the agenda. All I would say is that Cabinet members are welcome to remain if they wish to, but on the other hand, if they wish to leave after doing their bit, so to speak, that's fine by me. Quite happy for them to do that. And that also applies to officers. If officers wish to leave after they've done their part, feel free to stay or not, as you may wish. First item on the agenda is apologies. Any apologies for this evening?
From Councillor Emery, Councillor Jeffrey, Councillor Livingstone and Councillor Waters.
Thank you. The next item on the agenda is the minutes. The last Overview and Scrutiny meeting we had was Monday, the 20th of November. Are there any comments or corrections at this point for the minutes, or can we take them as an accurate record? Any comments from anyone? No? Can I have a seconder and a propose? I propose that we go ahead. Can I have a seconder? Yes. All agreed? Thank you. Should we just sign them, or should I sign them at the end? Sign them at the end. I'll sign them at the end. Okay. Declarations of members' interests. Are there any declarations of interest from members of the committee, that is? No? Announcements. There are no announcements from the Chief Executive, and I have no announcements either. Next item is the parking policy update, and Catherine Howe will talk to us about that. For those of you who are not here before, the parking policy has been a long story because members felt that the parking policy adopted by West Sussex County Council was not appropriate in many cases in terms of Horsham District Council's planning. And we were concerned a lot of policies were inadequate in terms of parking, particularly, for example, in Horsham Town, and that was agreed by all political parties. As a result of that, there was a task and finish group that did a work on it. It came to the Overview and Scrutiny Committee and was adopted. It went to Council and was adopted. But with the delays on the local plan, etc., it all seems to have, how can I put this, been sort of lost in the long grass. So at this point in time, I decided that it would be good to bring this one back to Overview and Scrutiny to find out from officers what the latest situation is and what probably the next steps will be. And with that, I will hand over to Catherine Howe. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. And just to say, I've also got Matt Bates with me, who's the planning policy team leader. So he's been involved in some of this work as well, depending on what questions may or may not be arisen.
Welcome, Matt.
And you've also stolen half my introduction. So there might be a little bit of repetition. But for those of you, obviously, who are newer to the group, obviously, I mean, you all know this anyway, but the County Council, obviously, they are the highway authority and they are a statutory consultee on planning applications. So obviously they provide planning team with advice on any transport implications of development, and obviously that includes parking. And their feedback is obviously a material consideration in informing planning decisions. So as Paul's alluded to, County Council, they've had parking guidance for many years, but they updated their guidance most recently in September 2020. And what this guidance did is to set out guidance that was used both in sort of more rural and urban parts of the district. And it wasn't just for car parking, it was also for sort of cycle spaces per property, and also covered aspects of commercial developments as well, and how many spaces would be required for that. So it's not just residential, but that seems to be the bit that I think is sort of the primary concern that's certainly been raised. So as Paul said, there has been a review that was taken place sort of late 2020, early 21, through the Overview and Scrutiny process, and as that it was resolved by the council through that process to appoint consultants to help develop an SPD, and also as part of that there were some suggested parking standards by the Overview and Scrutiny that could potentially be utilised. So what as officers we then have looked at, obviously we are bound by the MPPF and paragraphs, it's the updated one now, so the paragraphs 111 and 112, they set the matters that we can take into account when we're setting parking standards. And it's quite strict again in paragraph 115 that says that development can only be prevented or refused if the highway grounds impacts are severe. So it's quite a high bar essentially. And what we need to make sure is that any standards that we use in car parking are compliant with that MPPF requirement. Otherwise, we wouldn't be in a position where we could justify that as part of any decision making and would potentially be overturned at appeal. So what we did was we appointed transport consultants called Sistra, and they were appointed in February 22. And what they did was to review the parking standards, the 2020 parking standards from West Sussex County Council. And we asked them to identify where any changes required, were those parking standards suggested by Overview and Scrutiny, did they work, or would anything else be needed? And they also looked at the cycle standards, and we also asked them to look at any examples of good practice in the context of how parking and design work together, because it's all very well setting a standard for parking, but you also need to think about what that then looks like in the context of the development itself. You know, if you've got lots of parking, for example, that means you've got an enormous car parking space. You might not have the sort of flow of pedestrians or the green spaces that you might also want as part of an overall development, and the land take that's available. So it's all quite interconnected. So we received the study. It took a little bit of a while. It wasn't the easiest consultancy contract we've ever worked with, but moving on. The conclusions of the study were very much as follows, that a lot of the problems that I think have been identified with parking and development are very historic. So they actually predated a lot of the 2020 parking standards. Or you've got somewhere like Horsham Town, which is fundamentally, there's quite a lot of Victorian development, terrace development, which obviously has street parking, and that's quite difficult to retrofit in terms of what we do now. And it's what happens when you've got new development that comes forward. So obviously new parking and design guides can't necessarily resolve some of the existing development layout designs that we already have, but obviously it's then thinking how you might take it forward. Overall, the site visits and the best practice comparisons with other authority areas was that actually the county standards, generally speaking, were, the current ones that is, generally okay. However, and I think Paul again has alluded to this, is that within Horsham Town Centre, I think there is some concern that the standards that the county require are a little bit too low, which is based on the existing levels of car ownership. So, for example, in the 2021 census, there are 74% of central Horsham residents who actually own at least one vehicle. What that might look like in the future as things change, who knows, but that's where we are at the moment. The other thing they identified was that there could be improved requirements for cycle provision. That isn't the current standards, perhaps could do better in that. And again, it was picking up this issue of how you link parking standards with good design and the relationship between the development as a whole, not just, how many car parking spaces there are. So what we did was to report that back to PDAG, actually it's about this time last year, so the 13th of January last year. And at that meeting, it was noted that obviously that study would ultimately be progressed into further guidance, but obviously subsequent to that, we've spent most of the rest of the year obviously drafting local plans. We obviously have shared the study with the chairman of Overview and Scrutiny. And in terms of kind of where we go next, if it's going to be an SPD, that needs to be, so a supplementary planning document, that needs to be hung off the new local plan policy. So we're in this sort of slight limbo in the sense that, you could draft something, but there's no bite in terms of where we are in the local plan process. We need to go through the examination, which is obviously likely to be later this year. What we do have in the draft local plan, so paragraph 8.18, it makes specific reference to both the county standards and any future standards that we might produce ourselves. So there is that hook there. And policy 25 in the emerging plan, so paragraph 2, also states that adequate parking facilities in accordance with adopted standards is required. So again, there is that requirement there. We are obviously at a point where we are now open for representations on that policy framework. So that was started Friday, finishes on the 1st of March. So it'll be interesting to see what feedback we will get and whether any potential changes to the policy or updates are needed through that process. And I think really the last point to say is obviously picking up these points in terms of what the programme is in terms of the timetable for future guidance. We'll need to pick up and discuss with the Cabinet member.
Thank you, Catherine. So that's where we are at the moment. Any questions from committee members? Councillor Bevis.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, when I was chair of ONS, Vice Chairman Brian Donnelly put forward this plan for a task and finish group to look at off-street parking. The group themselves did a lot of work on coming up with proposals that, as you said, eventually went to council and was passed, and I don't remember any opposition to that. And then I think we as a Overview and Scrutiny Committee got a bit frustrated because it disappeared into some very long, very thick and very intractable grass, and we couldn't see where it was going. I know Brian Donnelly was very frustrated with what he felt was a fairly straightforward thing, just disappearing off the face of the earth, actually. I think in terms of where we are now, it's quite a technical issue. I mean, I think all planning is quite technical. It would have been quite helpful, I think, for members to have had something in writing before this meeting to mull over and absorb and maybe compare back to what the Task and Finish group did. I couldn't quite catch everything that Catherine was saying, so I'm not quite sure where we are. So I suppose my question is, in a nutshell, is what was proposed by the Task and Finish group and adopted as council policy going to appear in the local plan at some point?
Well, the short answer to that is no, because the standards themselves are set out in subsequent guidance that would always sit behind. And the other issue is, which was what I was explaining, was the MPPF requires any parking standards to be evidence-based, which is why we needed to do that study. And really what that study was showing is that the standards that the Overview and Scrutiny meeting came up with wouldn't necessarily be justifiable in terms of what the MPPF was saying. They were, you know, the evidence is showing that actually, you know, if an application came forward with different amount, which was in accordance with the county one, that would have been agreed as fit for purpose and therefore very difficult to refuse in terms of, you know, its appeal and that kind of thing in terms of you know, whether cost and what's reasonable in that sense. So there is work that needs to be done in terms of changing the standards, particularly around the town centre in Horsham, but the rest of the district, I think broadly okay. I think part of the problems that had been identified were very much looking at some of the historic problems that have been identified, for example, with some of the Broadbridge Heath proposals and development that have gone on there, which was to an earlier standard from the county council, which they definitely haven't worked as well as we would have liked. But I think the situation has evolved since then.
Yeah, I think we recognise that there are a lot of historical problems. There's a lot of problems with on-street parking. There's a lot of streets with absolutely no possibility of off-street parking. So yes, it's very congested, and I don't think we came up with any recommendations for that because we realised that's an intractable problem. But we did feel that where new development was going in, where it was clearly going to be of a size that would probably have at least 2 cars. And I know, sorry, I'm sitting next to Greens here, I'm very careful, but it was almost inevitable that most of these houses are going to have 2, if not 3 cars. And we wanted to have a policy that would reflect that and ensure that the normal sort of household would have sufficient room to park their cars off street and avoid any sort of problems with on street parking going forward. I mean, having seen the problems caused by previous policies, I think we're very keen to avoid that. I'd like the chairman to have this item come back when there is movement from the planning department on these rules that are still being looked at.
Thank you, Councillor Bevis. Do you want to respond to that, Catherine, or Matt?
Sorry, just getting to grips with the PA system. Yeah, I was giving Catherine a bit of a break because I've done some work recently in terms of overseeing the consultancy report that we had done that Catherine was talking about. Sorry, I'm Matt Bates. I'm in the strategic planning team. I'm the team leader for planning policy. Yeah, I think just in response, probably just sort of going into a little bit more detail on what this consultant report said. One of the key things that it pointed out was that actually the issue is not so much necessarily with numbers in terms of standards, but actually they were recommending that we need to do more work going forward in terms of the designs, the actual the street design essentially. So we did do some preliminary works officers on that aspect in terms of when we thought we might be producing an SPD. Events have overtaken slightly, but obviously one such change of circumstances, the government requiring local authorities now to produce design codes. So I think ultimately we saw that as a key kind of tool that we could use to improve on our guidance in terms of what comes forward in street design terms for providing for parking. So yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the problems we've seen in some of the newer developments, as Catherine said, they were kind of from a legacy parking standard that we wouldn't apply now anyway. But notwithstanding that, I think there's also some issues around how the actual parking spaces themselves were designed into the development, particularly looking at, I think there's been a lot of criticism around the Kilman Vale, the later phases of the Kilman Vale development, and I think that's a case in point where it's recognised and acknowledged that could have been designed a lot better to work as a wider kind of design concept, and that wasn't so much about the amount of parking, it was about how that parking was provided. So I think that's going to be what we as officers would recommend focusing on going forward, and we've obviously already had that. Yeah, so, and then as Catherine said, the standards themselves weren't found to be particularly at fault by the consultant. So as officers, obviously we reflect on what the evidence is, and when we had the work done, the only exception is in the sort of basically Horsham town centre, the urban areas, where if you compare it to other standards, the West Sussex standard for, say, Horsham town is a bit lower, specifically for one bedroom properties. That's 0.6 for the West Sussex as recommended, whereas other sort of comparable authorities with comparable towns such as Horsham have a higher standard. So, but it's difficult. It may be difficult to justify kind of doing lots of work in terms of that specific one area, when maybe we can sort of look at how we actually take forward implementation of, because these are recommended standards that West Sussex produce, they're not set in stone standards. So I think there's an argument for from a sort of implementation perspective to actually increase on that, and maybe there's scope for some sort of informal guidance. Thanks.
Councillor Croker.
Thank you, Chair. I'd certainly back up the call for some more flexibility in terms of the design for parking spaces. It doesn't all have to be concrete or grass that gets trashed. The other thing I think no one's mentioned is the use, or the fact that somewhat large white vans are now appearing in estates, being brought home overnight, and that is a problem, I think. Quite how we handle that one, I don't know. I'll leave that to my experienced colleagues.
I think the issue on that one is self-employed people bringing their vans home, actually. Mike. Councillor Kitchen.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd just like to say I would welcome a review of this. I think it's, to be honest with you, not before time, and it is set out in evidence here. There's a lot of concern about the way it's dealt with at the moment, and I would very much welcome a review.
Thank you. Any other comments? Councillor Circus?
Have we got a firm commitment that this will come back? I mean, there's clearly a view in certain quarters around the table that it's desirable for it to come back, but I'd like to see a firm commitment that it will come back. And while I've got the floor, can I be clear again just where the examples of good practice are going to be obtained? How extensive is that? Is it just looking at West Sussex, or is it, where are the various sources of good practice that we're going to study in order to see that we are keeping pace with good practice?
Yeah, sorry, Chair. Thanks, Chair. I think probably the first place, I mean, there's been a lot of work done at the national level by Department of Levelling Up Communities and Housing, particularly mindful of the National Model Design Code, which has been out, I think, for a couple of years or so now. And there's been sort of various things that have kind of come from that. But that's kind of the first go-to, so we would look probably wider than specifically this district or even West Sussex County for good practice examples. And I think we've kind of, we haven't really drilled that far into that aspect as yet because we're still working on our Horsham-wide design code. And that's still kind of at the sort of intermediate stages. So we would certainly be looking at examples from wherever we think the appropriate place is to look, basically.
Chairman, can we have some timelines for this?
Well, I
think it'd be helpful to have timelines, and also I go back to my first request that we have a firm commitment and maybe a dated commitment to bring this subject back to overview and scrutiny.
Chairman, can I come in at that point in terms of timelines and work programmes? That's probably something I will need to speak to Cabinet Member about. But certainly from our perspective, in terms of the resourcing of the policy team, obviously the focus has to be in terms of the local plan. Obviously we're at Regulation 19, there will be several thousand representations that come through, which takes significant time. We will then obviously have to focus on the examinations. And we also need to make sure that we've got a policy for this to be effective with. So it may not be that I'm very happy to take this back to this group, but the timing of that may not necessarily be immediate simply because there isn't the timescales. But I'm happy to provide some written notes as to what that could look like. I don't know whether that would help.
I think it would be helpful. I mean, there is a commitment, at least from this chair, to bring this back. I mean, the next ONS meeting is the 18th of March, and after that there's one in June. I realise that we're in full consultation in terms of the plan and everything, but I was a bit concerned because I visualised it that we would have an SPD basically about parking, and basically what matters sort of indicated is it would be tied up in street design and the rest of it, and I'm a bit confused. Or is an SPD the same as a design statement? I don't know.
It would incorporate both issues because I think the issue is to separate them apart. But the point really is that supplementary planning document has to fall off a planning or hang off a planning policy. And at the moment, we've got the current HDPF, which is obviously woefully out of date. And therefore, we need to get through the examination process to have a more up-to-date policy in which to hang it off. And therefore, it's a bit, by doing it sooner, you're putting the cart before the horse. And because we don't know at this particular point exactly what's going to come out of the Regulation 19 representation period, that there could be some changes that the inspector requires us to make to the parking policy, for example, which then would impact what we can say, what can and can't say in an SPD. Hence our sort of, it's not trying to be deliberately obstructive, but it's just, you've got to have something in place that actually, A comes before B essentially, and it has to be the local plan that comes before the SPD.
Now, I understand that an SPD hangs off of the policy, and we all agree that the existing HDPF is out of date, so we might ignore that. We have an outline policy at the moment, which is going to inspection, which, okay, there may be some changes. I'm happy to be proven wrong on this. And I don't see an inspector throwing out the whole of the planning policy as outlined at the moment. They may tinker with the edges. And what I don't want is to see more delay. I mean, I recognize what you say about how B comes after A, and I get all of that. But you can work in parallel to a certain extent and in concomitant, and at least
to a certain extent, but it just depends upon the actual staffing resources available to do both pieces of work. And that's the bit that I think I really do need to talk to the cabinet member on, because generally speaking, we would put, the whole team onto the local plan. That is, it is every officer will be fully involved in doing representations, and then it is a monumental piece of work in terms of the examination period. It seems almost like, we got to the regulation 19, that's it, we're off, but actually there's an enormous amount of work that sits behind that, particularly when you get to the examination, and there's a lot of back and forth in terms of resource that goes into that.
No, I recognise that, but what I said, I don't want this as an excuse for delay. I mean, I recognise there's a heavy workload with the representations and stuff, because I know what it's like from experience. So we will be bringing this back to Overview and Scrutiny, and I'm quite happy to discuss it with the cabinet member. I mean, the cabinet member needs to take on board that it's an important thing for this community, for the communities that we represent, and it's important for Overview and Scrutiny, because it's been hanging around Overview and Scrutiny now for 18 months, is it, Tony? Yeah, and we would like to see some action. So thank you, Catherine. Councillor Circus?
Would it be helpful, well, I understand all the things that are going to potentially delay the timelines on this, but to have a timetabled commitment? Because I've seen too many issues in this council over the years where there's been commitments to bring things back, but it's never been timetabled and they've been lost in the ether. And I don't want to, and I'm sure Tony's, I mean, if you need a proposal from me, I'm sure Tony will second me. But if we could have a timetable commitment.
Okay, I mean, I was going to make it quite simple and say that we'll table this at the next Overview and Scrutiny meeting, which will give a hard set date of the 18th of March, at least for if not an update or a document beforehand, at least we'll discuss it again on the 18th of March.
There won't be anything to discuss at that point, because we haven't, the work isn't.
Well, there won't be.
No, not at this point. Which I think what we can do is, I think what Philip was suggesting in terms of a timetable about what can work and when and how it would fit in, I think certainly that can be reported back.
How do members feel about that? Councillor Ellis-Brown?
I think it's important to ensure that the development is consistent with development and movement of the local plan. Otherwise, there's a huge risk that we do a significant piece of work on this and it has to be changed later because the local plan has changed. So we need to be mindful of the risk of pushing ahead at a pace that is not consistent with the local plan.
I think the concern is that more delay creeps into it. I get the point you're making and I absolutely agree with you. There's no point in doing a whole load of work to go and change it again because things change. But on the other hand, we also want to make progress. So I think what we will do is, okay, we won't bring it forward to the 18th of March. We'll look at June. But in the meantime, if officers could come up with a timeline and a documentation, that would be helpful. Is that agreed? All agreed? Thank you, Catherine. You're welcome to stay, you and Matt, but if you'd like to disappear, that's fine by me. Next item on the agenda is climate action strategy. So it's for us to receive an update from the head of sustainability and green spaces and from the cabinet member, Colette Blackburn. So thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening, everyone. Before questions, I'll just do a an overview, the climate action strategy is obviously really extremely important for the district. The proposed strategy is for the whole district and not just for the council. It's an important document for a community-wide response to the climate emergency, with a target to reach net zero by 2050 and to support the area to adapt to the changing climate. It is a 10-year strategy, but the actions are divided into short, medium and long-term timeframes, and there is a separate action plan. This is not a strategy for the council, but for the whole community. Horsham District Council cannot tackle climate change alone. Its own emissions only represent 1% of the whole district, and for some issues, Horsham District Council does not have direct control. The obvious example is transport, where West Sussex County Council and the Highway Authority have responsibility there. It's reflected within the strategy through by identifying 3 delivery routes. There's leadership, partnership, and communities. For many of the actions, partnership working and encouraging and supporting community involvement will be crucial. As this is a high-level strategy and not a plan, it does not include detailed, smart and measurable actions. Where actions are led by the council, more detail for implementation with timescales will be agreed. An example of this is information and advice for businesses and residents. A communications plan for this calendar year is currently being developed. A longer and more detailed strategy sits alongside the shorter version that is appended to the Cabinet report. This identifies the lead organisations, potential carbon savings and broad high-level estimate of costs. This is to help officers in implementing the strategy. As it runs to over 100 pages, the shorter, publicly accessible version has been produced. The draft was produced with input from officers across the council and other key organisations, and it was approved by Cabinet in March 2023. A consultation and engagement process was carried out over last summer and early autumn. Officers were conscious that the wider community had not had input into the development of the strategy, and so they wanted to rectify that. The consultation took the form of an online survey, one for residents and one for businesses. This was complemented by one-to-one engagement carried out by a consultancy. It involved interviews, focus groups, and attending events such as Parkrun. Respondents did not have to have read the draft strategy. There was a good response to the surveys and to the engagement events. The aim of it was to ascertain if the draft strategy contained the right priorities and if it had any significant gaps. This process confirmed that the draft strategy included the right goals and high-level actions. It did not have any significant gaps, but some changes of emphasis were required. The main update in the strategy has been to give greater prominence to water-related issues. Although this was interwoven into the draft document, water is now part of the land use section with a separate goal and 2 actions. These seek to reduce water consumption and flooding, as well as improving river water quality. Progress on the strategy will be reported annually, and it will be reviewed a minimum of every other year. The strategy will also be mapped onto an online platform known as One Planet. This will be used for monitoring and also to show how other climate action plans are contributing to the strategy's goals, such as parish and neighbourhood councils and community groups. The recommendations in the report are to adopt the climate action strategy for the Horsham district as contained in the appendix, to delegate authority to the Director of Communities in consultation with the Cabinet member, or myself, to update the climate action strategy and make amendments, provided that any such changes do not undermine the climate action strategy's core values, and to note the actions that have been undertaken and to approve the actions that will be required to be undertaken by the Council as contained in and in order to give effect to the climate action strategy. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. Are we going to any more, or
Helen, did you ask?
does Helen want to say anything?
Did you want to?
Not particularly, no. I think obviously the main issue is that the draft strategy was approved in March, and that, as Colette has pointed out, we undertook a comprehensive consultation and engagement process over the summer to ensure that we were reflecting as much as we can the views of residents and businesses across the district. And as she also commented on, generally that was the case. So we've made some minor amendments to the strategy, and that's what's before yourselves and then Cabinet on Thursday.
Thanks, Alan. Any questions from members? Councillor Circus?
I was going to ask a difficult question, really, but it came out of something I read in the Sunday Times to the effect that we can have a lot of discussion about what we might do on the environmental front and in relation to net zero, but very little discussion of the cost. And the thesis in this article in the Sunday Times was that the public did not appreciate how much money, public money, this was going to cost. And whilst it's a difficult message to get across to the public, since it is their money, it's public money, have a right to know how much it is costing, will cost. Also, what effect that might have on other areas of local authority expenditure, on things that they use and they appreciate. And so I'm sorry, no doubt the Cabinet member won't speak to me again, but my question to her is to ask the question, on the question of how much this is all going to cost, how does she reckon how important does she think it is to level with the public about the cost of what we're doing? And how does she expect, or how does she anticipate that we could actually convey to the public just what it's costing, and also the potential choices that may have to be made with other areas of local expenditure? Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Circus. I think there's no doubt in most people's minds now as to the situation we're in, where climate adaptation is concerned. People, at least we're finding, certainly in Horsham District, people are on board with adapting to climate change, doing what they can in their own way to make a difference. Communication around behaviour change and around explaining people's options and what they can do for a cleaner, healthier lifestyle and environment is crucially important, and we are working on that. Regarding cost, it hasn't been determined what's going to be sacrificed in order to create a healthier environment, and it hasn't been even determined exactly what it's going to cost. What is known for sure is that going forward, environmentally friendly, clean energy will cost people less. And that is certain. I don't know if Helen wants to add anything on.
Yeah, I think the main point you're trying to make, Philip, if I'm interpreting this correctly, is that the cost will fall on the council to make these changes, and that's not the case. Pardon? Not completely, no, because we will not be, for example, providing grants for people to install heat pumps, for example. That's government role to do that. Where our role is, and that's very much at the forefront of the strategy, is that leadership and facilitation role, working with communities, for example. Where the cost, I would argue, probably is more pertinent is what we're doing on our own estate, and that's something you'll be discussing later in terms of the capital. That's more a direct cost, I would say, than this strategy, in that what we're doing with this strategy is bringing different organisations together to help facilitate those changes. and making the most of government opportunities that are there. For example, there are grants available already for heat pump installation. So I think whilst you can't argue there won't be any cost, because there are, I mean, I'm employed to do that work, my team are employed to do that work, that is a cost to the council. And obviously we also work with consultants, for example. So I'm not saying there is no cost, but I think in terms of a lot of implementation, what we would be seeking to do is to work with other direct organisations, if that's helpful.
Thank you, Helen. Councillor Bevis?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I think arguably, no, I think definitely this is probably the biggest and most important programme that Horsham District Council will be undertaking for the next 26 years. Some of us won't be around to see the end of that programme, but I think we're all going to be on that journey. When it came to Cabinet last March, I was very critical about the state of the strategy at that time. I didn't like the fact that there weren't any smart objectives in it. I still don't like the fact that there aren't any smart objectives in it. I think although we've had a consultation, I think there are still things missing in the strategy. What I would have liked to have seen is that this strategy was adopted by full council. I think every member of this council should feel they own this strategy. By my reckoning, by the time it goes to Cabinet, it will have come to ONS, which is 13 members, not all of whom are here. It will have gone to the PDAG, which is another 9 members. It will go to Cabinet, which is 8 members. So that is 60% of the council at best. In fact, it's a good fewer than that. So I think it's a great shame that 40% of the council won't have been in a public forum where this is discussed prior to it being adopted. I think that is a real democratic deficit. But I'm told that is the way things have to be done, and I'm disappointed that is the way. My biggest concern really, my concern when I was chair of ONS, is how we in ONS monitor, scrutinise and have overview of this strategy. I'm beginning to see a little bit more movement on that. I was incredibly disappointed to read in the strategy that, and this is what it said when it was published, this strategy will be reviewed and updated every 2 years or sooner if needed, and a report giving details of progress will be made on the actions which will be available. I mean, this clearly wasn't written by anyone that's come up against a proper ONS committee, because I think we're fundamental to having scrutinised this and seeing it through. I know we're going to cooperate with a lot of different bodies, some statutory, some voluntary, right across the board, and that's great. But I think we also need a strong governance strategy on this, and I think the right place for that strategy is with this committee, with ONS. I'm pleased to hear that we're going to get an annual report. That is a lot better. I think, quite honestly, when this thing grows and expands, I'm not sure that this ONS committee will have the capacity to monitor it all. So I'll be interested to see how it pans out. I would like to see an annual report timetabled into our work programme. And I mean, looking at the agenda tonight, it's huge. So I would like to see that timetabled somewhere away from annual reports on annual budget setting. It's the wrong time of the year to be looking at this. I think we need time to look at it in a lot of detail, and I would look forward to that being maybe just before or just after the summer break, where we haven't got quite so much work on. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Travis. Yeah, I would agree with that we should do that when we come back from summer holidays, for example, when things are a bit more quiet, before we get into the budgetary cycle, which we're in the middle of at the moment. Councillor Sam Bateman.
It was just really to acknowledge what Councillor Circus has said, and just say that if in due course there is a willingness to itemise the cost of investment, could we at the same time also itemise the cost of not investing, so we understand the true opportunity cost of acting and not acting, and obviously detail who bears the cost of inaction as well, so we understand who pays the consequences of inaction as well. Thank you.
I think the issue on that is, how do you measure them, and how do you, it's like, I hate to quote Donald Rumsfeld, but there's some things you can actually measure, but there's some things that are very difficult to measure, as I'm sure Councillor Franklin can attest to from his professional experience. Councillor Lennox-Brown.
Thank you, Chair. A few points. Cost is only one factor to consider when considering this strategy. The net social benefit needs to be considered, and the environmental benefit also weighed against those costs. And in there is a book, Green Book, used by government, that allows you to determine that. So it's not just about cost. In here, I agree with Councillor Bevis here. I think a review every 2 years is not sufficiently, should be less than that. It should be at least once a year. There shouldn't be any measures in here. This is a strategy, tells you what you're doing, not how you do it. But there needs to be some performance measures decomposed from the strategy that's aligned to your timetable in here, so that we can measure performance against what we said we would be doing within the time frame that we said we would be doing things. So I think that needs to be in here. So I think, in summary, cost is just one factor. Need to look at the social and economic, social and environmental benefits, and I think the timetable in the strategy needs to be decomposed against performance measures, so that we can see how well we're doing against our strategy, and the time frame for review should be less than 2 years, because the dynamics of climate change are changing rapidly, and I think reviewing a strategy every 2 years would be too long a time frame. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Franklin, were you going to address?
Yes, I suppose just to reinforce perhaps what Councillor Circus and Bateman made about communication and listening to the Cabinet member on this. I think tuning the communication as we progress the strategy and bearing in mind where the public is with this is absolutely crucially important. If we get it right, then people will move with us, whether it's on cost versus other services that may need to be provided versus the absolute requirements we have to achieve in saving the environment, and in concert with national level communication that may be coming towards us. I think that keeping a really close eye and plan on how we communicate this whole strategy way into the future is going to be really, really key. If you get it wrong, I think we'll lose people. If we get it right, then I think we'll keep people with us. So that's my point.
Thank you, Tony. I think my observation on, Councillor Croker.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry to bust in there. I too, in the past, have been somewhat concerned about the planning aspect of this. But it seems, from what little reading I have done, is that the One Planet tool should be a means of getting an overview to this whole process. However, I don't find it to be the most intuitive thing to look at the moment. So could I request that councillors possibly offer some training in how to interpret the way the tool's being used, And indeed, is there an option that eventually as I understand it, it's an ongoing process, it's updated, that whole arena is open to the public to look at going forward? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Crowder. Do you want to come back, Helen?
Yeah, I think, yes. So I think the response in terms of One Planet actually links into the key performance indicators aspect, because once we've put the strategy onto the One Planet platform, we'll also be developing, we've already started to think about key performance indicators for that process as well, and that actually sits on that platform. So that's the way we're going to be monitoring the documents. Yes, I mean, I think we need to, they've updated the platform. So in short, we are going to be getting some more training on the use of that. And maybe we could do a session to just demonstrate it. One of the other things in terms of the use of the platform is in partnership with the South Downs National Park Authority, put in a joint bid to get some grant funding to actually also work with a lot of community groups and parish council and neighbourhood councils. Again, the idea being that I think the main point with this strategy isn't just a strategy for us. So we cannot have detailed action plans for other organisations. You know, we can't dictate to the parish and neighbourhood councils when they're going to produce a plan. What we could do is say, well, try and facilitate them and hope that X% have got them in place. That's the sort of thing that I would see, you know, envisage through that. There are some actions in it that are our responsibility, and that's obviously then when we can put more detail on it, and are already thinking about doing that. But yeah, so in terms of One Planet, we'll be using that for monitoring. It will have key performance indicators developed alongside that. That's a conversation that we've already started. And as I say, we've got this funding where we'll actually be able to use that. And the benefit of doing that is also it's been shown elsewhere where it's been used. It's still at its very early stages, but it can be quite useful for other organisations to see how they fit into that bigger picture, the shared outcomes. So externally, organisations can't get into the detail, but they can see those shared sort of outcomes and how those link together. It also helps from our point of view, because again, we can't deliver all this. You know, that's just not feasible for the council to do, and I would argue neither should we, quite honestly. So that's something I think that it will be interesting to see how that evolves. So that project is something that we've got funding for with the South Downs National Park Authority, and the project doesn't start until February with the funding. So we'll be gradually starting to roll that out, and they will be providing that training for the community groups. So once we're in that position, Mike, I think, yeah, maybe a session with councillors to explain the tool and how it works could be very useful.
Thank you. Councillor Osborne, you want to come back?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Another question, really, but I think Helen may have answered that. It's about capacity to deliver the strategy. Do we have that capacity? But you've mentioned that you'll be working with other third parties to deliver that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I think what comes out of that is that there are two strands of communications, actually taking up on Councillor Bevis's point that councillors need to be kept informed and brought up to speed, and the members of the public, obviously, because we're spending their money and the rest of it. But don't forget the backbenchers and the councillors, because that is easy to do, I would suspect. And the other thing is that for Bradley is that we'll bring forward, after the summer, we'll bring forward the climate strategy again to discuss it in more detail, and that will give me time to discuss it with members of the committee, exactly where we go on the measurement and the monitoring of it in a more deliberate manner, I suspect. Do you want to come back, Tony?
Very briefly, Chair. Can I have a response on my comment about not all the councillors having seen this strategy yet? And can I recommend that a briefing for all councillors is organised as soon as possible?
Would you be willing to do that, Colette, with Helen at some time? I mean, I know that this has gone to the PDAG and a number of people have been consulted, but at least you should give people the opportunity to come to a briefing And if they don't come, well, that's their loss really, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to do that.
Thank you. Next item on the agenda is Capitol Theatre refurbishment. Colette, if you want to stick around, you can, but if you want to go home, please feel free. And I'll hand over to John Olson.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you for inviting me this evening to present on the proposed investment in the Capitol Theatre for both decarbonisation and refurbishment. The Capitol Theatre was very special. It is a landmark, no doubt the jewel in the crown of our district arts and cultural offering to our residents. According to the Theatres Trust, 14% of all theatres in the UK, just 116 in England, are operated by local authorities, so we can count ourselves lucky to have one of those in Horsham. The COVID pandemic put immense pressure on the arts, including theatres, yet those that have continued to be prioritised as vital cultural assets have rebounded. Our panto this year, the best attended panto since 2009, with a total of just under 15,000 people coming to see the exceptional John Partridge. Get your tickets now for his return next year. It was also the best performing panto financially, ever. So, of course, the theatre and arts and culture represent non-statutory service spending, yet these are some of the many areas that our residents look to the council to support and provide. This year, the council put into our 4-year council plan, under our theme of supporting peoples and communities, to invest in local arts and leisure and foster civic pride. And while there are great environmental reasons to proceed with these new proposals for the capital, reducing the carbon emissions of the greatest carbon producer we are directly responsible for, ultimately, I see this as an investment in local arts, in our cultural portfolio and offerings. Besides upgrading energy performance, the seats are tired and are neither fit for purpose nor to the level many cinema and theatre goers expect. The comfort break facilities are not what they would be expected and do not currently meet the needs of all potential visitors. The hospitality offering and setup could use improvement to positively impact on running costs and revenue. And as a result of investment, we can expect an increase in the quality of productions attracted to our community. And all of this will impact the bottom line, the annual subsidy. I thank my predecessors actually for embarking on this journey and commissioning the reports which support the proposals before you now. In short, the Cabinet report asks for approval for a £10.7 million investment in the capital. This capital expenditure is to be funded by reserves, specifically the Environment and Infrastructure Earmarked Reserve. And this exciting project seems to fit perfectly with the objectives of holding and spending this reserve. This is a significant expenditure for the Council. Therefore, over the past few months, we've been ensuring that all members have had an opportunity to be engaged with these proposals, including regular updates at my PDAG, group briefings where members were able to ask officers direct questions. Of course, Cabinet has been thoroughly engaged in the process, and myself and officers continue to be available to answer questions. And we're currently finalising an FAQs document based on members' queries for members and a version for the public as well, which will be circulated shortly. So another opportunity presents this committee tonight, and with the Chair's permission, I welcome any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Olson. Any questions from the committee? Councillor Circus.
Thank you, Chairman. I have to say I have mixed feelings about this. I recognise that the Capitol Theatre is a well-respected, well-liked institution in Horsham. It probably plays a certain amount of a part in the studies we get that say that Horsham is one of the best places to live in the country. And that's in part because of the non-statutory services that we provide, and that would include the Capitol Theatre. But on the other hand, I represent a part of the district that doesn't relate as closely to Horsham as people obviously who live in Horsham and around Horsham. And the people I represent probably relate perhaps more in terms of leisure facilities and theatre facilities towards Chichester, towards Worthing, towards Brighton. And they're going to, this comes back, I suppose, to the point I made earlier about communication. They're going to look at a very sizable sum of money, their money, Because as I've said on many occasions, the people in West Chiltington pay the most in terms of council tax and get the least in terms of what the two local authorities spend on it as a community. So you see, as a ward councillor, I feel in a difficult position justifying to my residents this quite substantial sum of money which relates to an institution which they don't feel as close to as people who live in and around Horsham. But on the other hand, I do understand, looking at it across the district and looking at it from a more northerly part of the district point of view, it is an important institution, and I think we've got in surveys a great deal of credit for the non-statutory services that we've maintained over the years. So to put it bluntly, Chairman, I feel conflicted. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Circus. Any other questions? Councillor Frankland?
Yeah, on a similar theme, really. I was going to address a slightly similar point, but from perhaps a slightly different angle. And I recognise that if you live within walking distance of the capital, as I do and my children do and all the rest of it, then it's immediately available to you, and much more so than if you live 20 miles away. So as a oversight scrutiny committee, should we be asking of this project what we might be able to do to make the activities at the capital more available in some way to residents who live further out in the district? I think that would be something we should be looking at. I'm not sure if we are. Maybe that's a question for the cabinet member there, John. I'm delighted that Councillor Circus's residents have such great access, of course, to Brighton and to Chichester and to Worthing, and they don't even have to pay for it.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Bevis?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, continuing on Councillor Circus's theme, I mean, I think, yes, it's always been recognised that there's a feeling amongst people living in the south, where I used to live a long time ago, that they don't really get quite as much bang for their buck as people in Horsham. And I think this council has recognised that over the years. They did invest in the swimming pool at Stanning, they invested in the swimming pool at Billingshurst, they've invested in a number of other fairly major facilities, but you can't really sort of redraw geography to make things perfect. It's inevitable that if you live right in the south, you're going to look at the places that are convenient to you, and Horsham, unfortunately, isn't convenient. I think one of the great things about this proposal is that it does look at the seating in the theatre and increasing the number of seats. And by increasing the number of seats, we will be able to attract a better offer. And hopefully, news of that improved offer will filter even down to West Chiltington. So I hope people will hear about it and come and try it out. I'm sure that a lot of them come up for the panto. If they see some nice, comfortable seats, perhaps they come more often. On a completely different subject, it's interesting that this is part of our strategy to get to net zero. But in fact, initially, we were going from 286 tonnes of carbon dioxide to 100. But that will then reduce as the impact of generating power produces less carbon dioxide. So it just demonstrates that we are hostage to other organisations in terms of our strategy, but it sets us on the right road, and it sets us on a road that when hopefully power stations can produce power without producing carbon dioxide, then the theatre should be pretty well zero. So that I think is good news for the future.
Thank you, Councillor DeBovis. Any other questions? Councillor Croker.
Thank you, Chair. I think, just to correct my Councillor Bevis, I think it was a reduction of 100.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
So it's basically a 35% reduction, which I find worrying, I suppose. It still leaves a long way to go. But equally, I appreciate the social benefits of it, even if only, I think, 1% of BN44 residents actually attend the capital. Thank you.
Would officers like to expand?
Yeah, thanks for the clarification, Mike. You're absolutely right. It's reducing by 100, but that is a conservative figure. We've been quite careful just to set that within a realistic figure. We're working from a feasibility study. If you're going through the REBA stages later, if approved, there will be some more surveys that are carried out. We fully expect that to reduce further, but we are being cautious from the feasibility studies. And Councillor Bevis, you're quite right. As the grid decarbonises, we expect that the carbon emissions from that venue will also decrease as well. There's got a slightly longer timescale set to theirs, obviously, as 2050, but we're in the right direction with all the figures that we've got.
Thank you. Any further questions? Councillor Bateman?
It's really just picking up on what people are saying about reach, and not just in geographical terms, but obviously, are we also reaching all different types of audiences? And I'm thinking really, probably from an educational background really, and thinking of people with disabilities and special educational needs, the arts, the music, the first thing to be cut when it comes to schools, budgets are right down. And of course, if you're not getting access to arts in schools, where are they going to access them? And of course, that means in terms of our district, it's the capital. And if we don't allow it there, where else are they going to be able to access arts and music? Theatres, they're part of an ecosystem, and what they bring to towns is absolutely extraordinary. And we've just got to make sure that we're concentrating on reach and making sure that the reach is hitting not just geographically, but also hitting different parts of our society as well. And I'm thinking very much in terms of special educational needs and SEND people.
Councillor Brown? Oh, Nick, do you want to? Sorry, Nick, you put your hand up first.
Just coming back on that point, if I can. I mean, the capital already has quite a vast programme in terms of reaching out to different people. So we do dementia-friendly film screenings, we do autistic-friendly screenings as well, and shows. Part of the refurbishment will also be placing a changing places facility within there. And it's really important changing places, because you can have disabled access toilets, but a changing places facility means that you can take a fully grown adult into a changing places facility. And that's really key for a nighttime economy or a leisure access, because people just won't come out. It'll be the third one within the town. There's one in Swan Walk and there's one within the Peary's Place car park. And I know from working with those groups, that really does make a difference. So if you're coming to a pub with an adult who needs to be changed, you need a changing places facility. So all these improvements will be building on that, absolutely.
Councillor Brown?
Thank you, Chair. I'm fully supportive of this project. The arts is being decimated across the country, and I think for Horsham we should sustain our high profile with the capital. My question really is for Nick is, will there be sufficient governance around the delivery of this project to ensure that we deliver it within the costs that we've identified?
Yeah, we've got a project manager called Carol Agar. I think you've probably met her, I'm not sure if you have. She comes from planning. There'll also be a project work group, I guess, all that we put together to manage that. The procurement process will also put things in place that do that, those management packages that we were talking about earlier, about bringing that schedule of work in.
And there will be a risk register available for us to see at this committee. Okay. Thank you, Nick.
There's an officer consensus on that one then, I think. Any other questions or items on the topic? I mean, I must admit, Councillor Bateman threw me when she brought up REACH, but REACH in my context has a totally different meaning. It's to do with chemical regulations, but never mind. I mean, the one point I'd make that's coming out of this is the success of the Year of Culture was because of very good communications and good sale. I hesitate to use sales pitch, but I think you get the message. And essentially, I think the message that's coming from Councillor Circus and basically is that comms need to be good about this and across the board. I do have one worry is that there seems to be no bottom line impact or direction. It was just mentioned in passing and brushed over that the bottom line, but it wasn't said would improve or go down. So does that mean the subsidy would go up is a question that immediately goes to mind, because already it's running at a loss. And are we going to run it at a bigger loss? I hope not. And the other point, I think, is using the capital to upgrade, no pun intended, using money to upgrade the capital is fine. But I think we've already pointed out earlier on that if you spend capital on one thing, you can't spend capital on something else. And so therefore you can already see, I suspect, that the administration is going to have a difficult balancing task ahead of it, because you can't spend the same money twice. And I think I'll just leave it at that. So I think those are the messages coming out. I think I'll move on to the next item on the agenda. As I said, Nick, if you want to stay, you're welcome. Same for John, if you want to stay, or you can go as you wish. And Helen as well. I suspected that might be the answer. And thanks, Paul. And I'd like to thank Paul Anderson as well. Thank you. Do you want a break, or shall we just crack on? Crack on? We'll just crack on, all right? Okay. Next item on the agenda is item 8, which is the annual plan. Really, it's ahead to receive an update from the Head of Finance and Performance.
I'll just quickly introduce the item by summarising the annual plan for 2024-25. There are a total of 86 items that Council will focus on in the forthcoming year, and these are set out under the themes adopted in the Council Plan 2023 to 2027. And I'll take questions on the item in the Annual Plan 24-25.
So 86 items, so a very hefty programme. It'll be interesting to see if they're met. One is, it's like you always wonder when you go into a restaurant and you get 86 items on the menu, you wonder how much of them are fresh and how much of them come out of the freezer. It's a bad analogy, probably. Does any member of the committee have any questions on the plan? Or are we silenced in front of the amount? Councillor Ellis-Brown?
Question. I think I read somewhere that the KPIs are being reviewed. Yes. Will those, once they've been reviewed, will they come back to this committee to have a look at what we're measuring and how we're measuring that and reporting on those? Or is that unnecessary?
Do you want to answer that, Don?
Shall I take that one? So in the appendix, you'll see that there is a list of indicators 24-25 that are suggested. They have been slightly modified from previous discussions that we've had at this committee. So one or two of those have changed. It would probably be sensible, wouldn't it, to review those now as we approve this plan. And if you have suggestions that you would like to include, then obviously we can look and do that. It would make sense again when we're planning 25-26 to actually build those indicators alongside the actual annual plan and have them hand in hand with the projects and the things that are actually to be delivered. But that's perhaps an extra step that we're not quite ready for yet, unless you have some suggestions to make.
How many of these KPIs are the same for the audit committee, or are they totally different KPIs, or are they the same in both cases? Audit committee has a number of measures, doesn't it, when it sits?
It does. Some of them are the same, but they all get reported here.
Okay. There was one point that Councillor Croker was looking at one KPI. Do you want to touch on the planning one?
It's kind of you to offer, Chair, but I'm not prepared to talk about it at the moment, sorry.
It's okay, because I wanted to talk to you about it.
I was going to come back on, but
Say again?
it was a different point I'd like to raise, but
Go ahead.
in Inspiring Green Futures, section 2, there's a bullet that we're going to ensure all vehicles purchased for the council fleet emit very low carbon or are electric. I'm just wondering whether it would have been more useful to add if needed at all, because mechanically propelled vehicles are all going to have a carbon footprint, and there's no getting away from that. And part of the plan, surely, for a greener future is we arrange things so we don't need mechanically propelled vehicles where possible. So that was just a point I wanted to make of that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Ellis-Brown.
Yeah, should we give consideration to a planning KPI in terms of how many applications have gone through in a given period, how many were refused, how many went to appeal, how much that cost us? So a bit more scrutiny perhaps around planning with some effective KPIs designed to continually improve our planning process. I know there's a review coming up shortly, but some measures there that continually improve, that link to the development of the councillors on those planning committees.
Yes, I would totally endorse that. I mean, I've seen draft KPIs floating around and was going to make some comments on those, but I mean, do you want to come back on that, Don? Yeah.
I can pass on those thoughts to the planning department, or you can, of course, have those conversations to see which exact indicators you might want. I know that there are indicators in a layer below these key performance indicators that are already collected, and therefore it would be useful for you to confirm your choice of those, and also then it would be for the committee and councillors to decide whether they want to promote those into the list of KPIs. We obviously need to bear in mind, though, that you can't have every single performance indicator being reported, otherwise you lose the wood for the trees. So.
Oh, that's true, but there's a very useful set of KPIs published in planning as it is, and I suspect it would answer 90% of where Councillor Ellis-Brown is coming from, and certainly be worth looking at. I hesitate to use the word promoting it from one level to another, but it's certainly worth looking at.
I was just going to say, though, I don't know whether those are reported through the planning committees at all. No, they're not.
They used to go before the change of administration. There were pre-planning meetings that took place, and at those pre-planning meetings, my understanding is those KPIs were reported to the planning committee when they came to the pre-planning meeting. Those pre-planning meetings have been abolished, so that doesn't happen anymore. Councillor Bevis.
Sorry, Chair.
Just in response to the chairman, you'll notice that one of the items in the annual plan is around looking at the planning system, how it operates, and whether it's doing it in the optimum way possible at the moment. And if that review is open to considerations of different ways of different structures of planning and KPIs for planning within it. So that is already there within the plan for this coming year.
Thank you. Councillor Bevan.
Thank you, Chair. Again, it's in section 2 of Inspiring Green Futures. The last point, I can't translate really. It says investigate options to decarbonise and improve the energy efficiency of the council's leisure centre's remaining council properties. I understand up to leisure centres, but remaining council properties, I don't. Could someone explain?
I can do Yeah. Oh, well, Ines, you want to speak?
Shall I go first and I'll
Yeah.
tidy up behind if necessary?
Okay, well, I mean, leisure centres, obviously, because they're ours, but there are other ones. I mean, for example, the drill hall's a council property. What are we going to do about decarbonisation there? There's Park Barn. There's other buildings that are owned by the council. Okay, the main ones are the capital and the leisure centres, decarbonisations, but they're not the only ones.
There's properties like
But there should
Lincott
be an
Square and
and in
things like
there
that.
or something, or a comma, or
There should be an and in there, and there probably is in the final report.
Yes, it's just correction of language, it's fine. Any other questions or items on this? No? Next item on the agenda is the review of the council's budget and medium-term financial strategy with an update from the Director of Resource and or Cabinet member.
I'll take it first, if you don't mind, Chairman.
No.
Okay, so there's a draft budget which appears in the papers for the Cabinet, which I'll be recommending for adoption by the Cabinet this week and subject to their agreement by Council next month. What are the sort of the key points? I mean, it's a very long document because it's a budget document and expect it to be, but I'll just sort of highlight a few key points out of it, which are maybe the most salient ones. In terms of net expenditure, it's rising by 800,000, and that's not because we decided to spend more, especially. It's basically the result of inflation and the pay supplement that we had over the past year. In terms of how we're paying for it, headline council tax will go up for the majority of residents in Horsham district by 2%. We are increasing the overall council tax receipt by the permitted cap of 2.99%, and that difference between the the 1%, roughly 1% difference is being made up by increasing the special charge for the unparished areas of Horsham Town. Now, that's for those the Horsham Town residents in those 3 wards don't pay any parish precept because there is no parish. So this replaces the parish precept. And you may think, well, that's quite a big burden on the on those 3 wards. But in fact, they have historically very low precepts or very low special charge. And in fact, with an increase of around £9 for each property that's Band D, that still takes it to less than half the average of a parish precept from last year, even before we look at what rises the parishes may put in. So it's still very modest. It's only about £35 compared to, I mean, in Billingshurst, for example, last year it was 110. A lot of, I think, in 150 in Nuthurst. So it's very reasonable, I would say. So that 2% for most residents, for Band D property, that's £3.34 for the year, taking it up to £170.28, which remains the lowest in West Sussex. We will continue to offer council tax support to those most in need among our residents, and that's in recognition of the effects of the cost of living crisis, and that's funded by a specific one-off grant. We have an ambitious capital programme, 10.5 million. Some of that is the initial spending on the capital, but there are other projects right across the district, car parks, rural car parks, Black Horse Way in Horsham, there's some improvements there, and a number of other items, some of which are carries over from last year, which have not been completed to date. Of course, if you look at the medium-term financial strategy, it's currently projecting a deficit of 3.7 million by the end of the decade. That is clearly not sustainable, and we will be making, we will bring through proposals and solutions to reduce that deficit during the next financial year. And in fact, you'll find that in the annual plan. So it's kind of the annual plan is to make a plan. But given that we have a statutory duty to present a balanced budget every year, that will happen because what am I going to say? Necessity is the mother of invention, and certainly that is my intention. Finally, I would describe the budget as a prudent budget. It's forward-looking, and it's there to support our ambitious annual plan, which we've just been discussing at some, or not that much length actually, but at some length. And I think that's really all I'm going to say on the matter at the moment. If you have a very detailed question, I may not be able to answer it straight off, because I noticed we haven't had any questions submitted, which I think is the normal procedure for ONS. But if I can't answer a question, I might ask Dom, and if we can't answer it together, we might just defer it. Okay, thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Bainham. Any questions? Councillor Franklin.
Thank you, Chair. And I should maybe know the answer to this, but how do we track how well we achieve our capital spend against the budget that we set year on year on year? Do we have a KPI for that? And
yeah, we monitor it every month. So it comes out in the monthly budget monitoring. You'll see how much we've spent on capital things. Historically, it's always quite difficult because that's the one that can be affected by factors that aren't totally in our control. Maybe a contractor taking longer to build something than they were going to say, or other things. I mean, last year the capital budget was only about 50% spent. This year, I think we're on track for around about 85%, which is not bad if you look at our peers and what other people achieve. And clearly, we aim to spend 100%, but that's not always that. Well, it's very rarely completely possible to do that.
Any other questions? Councillor Circus.
I'm flying a bit of a kite here, but I think I'm right in saying that given that the administration is planning quite an expansive budget in terms of capital projects, quite an ambitious expenditure programme, it would be open, of course, to the administration to organise a local referendum and to tell the public what they propose to spend money on in terms of projects, and see whether the public would be willing to go for or accept a much larger than the normal statutory ceiling for council tax increases, to support it rather than run the potential risk to the financial well-being of the council, including the possibility of deficits. I just throw that out because it is I think I've got the analysis right. It is open to us as an authority to have a local referendum so that we can break the ceiling, the normal ceiling for council tax increase, and one could do that as part of an opportunity to get the public to know what is proposed in terms of new expenditure and an expansion of expenditure. And I suppose it's one way of finding out whether they approve of it. Just a suggestion.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Circus. Well, if you look at the examples from around the country, it's open to all councils to hold referendums to increase their council tax cap. There's only a very small number of councils who've actually done it, and in every case they were resoundingly, they got a no. All of them got no's by massive margins, because it's human nature. If people say, are you going to vote to put up your tax? People just say no. Currently, it's not in our plan for this year because we have the budget is there based on our 2.99%. We've got no plans to introduce a referendum right now. It's something we can consider, but I think we would only do it in the direst circumstances where we are completely failed by central government to support what we need to spend on our residents.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments?
I would like to comment on that. I think it's a
Councillor
really
Franklin.
interesting idea. I'm sorry. Is that working? I think it is, yeah, not too. I think it is a really interesting idea. I'm not surprised that people don't vote for it. I do wonder, I mean, firstly, how much does it cost to do it? I think that's one thing would need to be considered. As a communication exercise, I think it would also be interesting because it would in no doubt highlight to people that running services and paying, paying the bills is an expensive exercise. The money doesn't come from nowhere. I wouldn't be surprised. I'd be interested to find out how that nudge type communication worked in those councils where they have actually tried it. They may not have achieved a higher or an approval of council tax increase, but I wouldn't be surprised if it got the message across that these things cost money.
I think there are many ways you can get the message across. That's a sort of fairly obscure way of doing it, if you don't mind me saying so, Tony. One of the things we will do is be putting in when the council tax demands go out, the letters go out, there'll be a little explanation leaflet in there on how it's spent. It always is, yeah. But there doesn't have to be, but there always has been. We'll continue to do that. The other is public debate, really, I think.
Thank you. I've actually seen examples where it's like a quiz is put up online, and basically people are asked to spend money according to their priorities, making sure that, of course, when it reaches zero, you don't have any more money to spend, and then they have to go back in a reiterative loop to modify what they spend the money on. And then the feedback can be quite useful, I suspect, to the person who's running this, what I would call the quiz or the feedback. And I think that's one way that one can do it. Any other questions on the budget and medium-term financial review? Councillor Bateman?
It's rather a question. It's more sharing of information than it is a question. I asked Dominic over the last few weeks about the increase in central government funding. And it's really just, I'm thinking, it might have been wise for me to ask that here, but I didn't, and you gave me the information, so it's really a case of I ought to share what you said to me, if that's okay. It was really just, I just asked what difference the government extra funding would make to us. And he told me that it would mean that we had a 4.9% increase overall, which included the council tax assumption of 2.99%, and which just about met what we needed it to be. So it's kind of at the moment, when I see there might be a future need for that sort of communication, I think right now with situations as they are with household budgets, I think it would go down very badly. It would not go down well with families who are just about, well, probably sinking to even broach that sort of issue. And while we can keep our heads above, we shouldn't be taking down others who can't.
Thank you. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. That's a useful point. One of the things that is difficult for us is, although we get government grant, we get a settlement every year. It's always described as a one-off. It's only for 1 year. And if you're trying to make plans, I mean, we're making plans for 2030, 2050 in a complete vacuum of information from what comes from central government. So, we really cannot rely very much on them. And what they give this year, they can take away next year.
Thank you. I think we've exhausted that topic. All I would say to councillors, well, some of them more experienced, but the less experienced councillors, the first bit to go and look at in these papers is go and look at the tables and the appendices at the back. Read the management summary and then go and look at the numbers at the back, because that's where the real information is kept. And I can tell you that from my experience. Thank you. If you wish to go, Mark, please feel free, or you remain. Tom, do you want to stay on as well? Okay. And Sam, if you want to go. No, thank you for coming. Next item on the agenda is the update from the Task and Finish Group. Sam, that's over to you.
Okay, the Task and Finish Group met at the beginning of January, and in that meeting, the agenda was to review the policies that link to enabling teenage girls really to make use of the outdoor sports and leisure facilities that we have out there, so that everybody is able to make use of our investments. There are new staff here at the council, and it was felt that they needed time to review the policies themselves at this point, I would say. I didn't feel that they felt that they were in a position to make changes to those policies just yet. They wanted to see for themselves what they wanted before we influenced that. There was also a request that we have John Olsen attend some of those meetings, given he's cabinet member with responsibility for green spaces. So I've spoken to John. John's obviously agreed that he would have a look at that. And finally, one of the people who's on the First Space group has sadly stood down from his position as councillor, which means there's now only 2 of us on that Task and Finish group. And I think it probably would require an extra person if anybody is interested in supporting and getting involved in what we're doing. I'm more than welcome for anyone to come on board.
So, I mean, basically, I'm sorry to hear that one of the members of your group stepped down, Sam. Thank you for updating us. I mean, are any of the councillors around the table willing to step in? Otherwise, I will add your Task and Finish group to what I intend to do with the proposals that are coming up, and basically ask all councillors, apart from cabinet members, to see if they would join your group and the other Task and Finish groups as well, because there's 2 more coming up behind. If nobody around the table is wanting to jump in, I will take it as a priority to go and ask for volunteers to come and join your group and to work your working party. Would you, Tony? Oh, thank you for that. And Bradley will remind me, because he's my aide-memoire, that we will still include your group in that circulating letter from myself, because you could do with a 4th actually, just in case.
There is one small additional thing. It's just that the work that we're doing is getting external interest. There was a request for media interview on it just at the new year. So it's just to let you know that it is being watched outside what we're doing as well, with interest.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. Any questions for Sam from anyone? No? Well, thanks, Sam. Next item on the agenda is the work programme. Now, basically, unfortunately, one was only sent today, but you will have in front of you 2 scrutiny work programme suggestions for consideration. One to be started if you agree and if we can find volunteers to join the working party. One short term to start soon, and then one later on, depending on resource and availability of members, to take on the other one. So the first one is a suggestion from Belinda Waters, which is to review a sample of the HDC existing building contracts and to evaluate the outcome of all the contracts in terms of existing and acquired assets, to look at cost effectiveness, potential profit and benefit. And basically, it's effectively to look at how we do the process of renting out our buildings, what measures we take to assess the value that would be generated from it, and basically increase clarity, at least to councillors, because for most of us, we are unaware of the detail. And you can say that we don't need to know the detail, and probably we don't need to know it for every building, but there are certain key buildings and certain key assets that would be good to get better understanding from. And basically, there was a presentation by the head of property in 2023 where some of the properties and contract terms were mentioned, and I think that would be useful background for that working party to get engaged with. And basically what we'd be looking for is to improve the governance of the decisions, to have a register or a better understanding of all of these things, to be kept in one place so that anybody on the council could consult them, and have a protocol in place that's after the task and finish finishes, a protocol to ensure that each contract is logged effectively. Well, I don't know if anybody's got any comments on that first one before I move to the other one. I would also make a point that it's also quite useful to build councillors' experience as to how the council does things and to get a better understanding of the engine room, if I can put it that way, of what goes on in the council. So what I propose to do is, if the committee agrees, that I will open this to all council members. I know that some council members are interested to join the working party, but if one of the volunteers or one of the members here is willing to take that on and to chair that and to steer that forward, that would be great. Any comments on the working party? Otherwise, we can look to Belinda to lead it. But any comments or feedback on it?
Well,
Councillor Franklin?
Yeah, only to give my support to it in that I think it's a good programme that we should be implementing.
Thank you. But we need people to do it now because if we adopt this, we need to get it done, or we need people to take it forward. Councillor Bevis. Well, I've got Councillor Walters and yourself. I'll find some more. But as I said, I'm going to open it, if you agree. I mean, do you agree that we take this forward into our programme of work? Because I think it would be quite valuable. Okay. Well, thank you for that. So I'll talk to Councillor Walters, who is the chairman of Constitution Governance. And I know there are some other members of the council who would be interested in joining that. We'd be looking for a group of about 5 people, really, 4 or 5 people. Thank you. The next item is one perhaps to be started in about 3 months' time, or a bit later, depending on how members feel and what resource we have. Because of course we have officer resource to consider as well as councillor resource, and officer resource is quite limited. Already we've got 1 task and finish group running with Sam. I think 2 is okay. I think 3 is a bit much. So this one is one by myself. Basically S106 agreements, essentially all the reviews that I have seen, inclusive of a recent audit report on 106 agreements, is all about the money, it's all about finances, it's all about the 106 commuted sums, etc., etc. But 106 agreements are about far more than just that, and 106 brings with it what I would call non-financial issues. Things like hard and soft landscaping, public open space management, land transfers, for example, from developers to management companies. And the recent audit, which is going to the audit committee, I've seen the draft, and the draft has to be approved before going to the audit committee, but basically only looked at things from a financial perspective. We as councillors get listings of 106 funds, both district county sums on SIL and on 106, but on the 106, it's all about the money. There is evidence in certain planning applications which are listed here of some provisions not being provided, even though in the 106 they were meant to be provided. There are examples in Pulborough, there are examples that I was given in Southwater, and I'm sure there must be some in Billingshurst, because again, Broadridge Heath. I'm not talking about things like schools not being delivered, I'm talking about the other stuff like footpaths, play areas, things of that nature. And also there is evidence that public open spaces were not handed over by developers and remain in the hand of developers and were not handed over to the management companies. Which then, you know, a number of people, I've had complaints about the way public open spaces are managed, and that is our policy on public open space. So there needs to be clarity on the monitoring and the management of the non-financial side of 106s. And basically, this is my proposal, that we have a record in terms of when planning decisions are made, you know, say majors or over 10 units or whatever it is, that a listing is generated by the system or by officers that then gives an aide memoir of what the infrastructure would have been or what the infrastructure promise would be or the amenity, and to provide officers a simple tick list so they can check. Because in one particular case, the land was meant to be handed over to the management agent by the developer 15 years ago. Still hasn't happened. Yet there is a legal agreement in place saying it should. So, and the intention is that this would be open to all councillors. So, I mean, but basically I'm looking at this maybe in 6 months' time, once Sam's group or the group on the other proposal get to the finish or get to the end, and then we'll bring this one forward. I don't want to overburden the system. Can I have feedback on that proposal and your views, please? Councillor Taylor?
I think it's an excellent idea. I support it, and I would like to be a part of it.
Councillor Franklin?
Yes, likewise, I think this is really important. Personally, I feel it's very, very important, but I think it is something that when we get this wrong, our residents immediately put their hands up and say they've never delivered that, and I think we're doing them a disservice if we don't do this on behalf of them. And I would also like to be involved in this.
Thank you. It's not a criticism of the system, it's just that it is easier to look after the money and to follow the songs than to do the other stuff, that's all. Councillor Ellis-Brown.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I am supportive of this. I think it's a very good idea and would like to be involved.
Sorry, Councillor Bevis.
Yeah, I'm going to support this as well, Chairman. In my ward, we've got a number of parcels of land. I don't know whether they were subject to a Section 106 agreement because it was a very long time ago, but it's causing residents a lot of angst now because these parcels have been sold on and are now being auctioned. There's absolutely no way anyone can make use of them, but it does cause panic in people's minds when they see a piece of land which is just a shortcut between a road and a public open space being put up for auction, and frankly it's a nonsense. And if there was a Section 106 way back in the distance, then if your proposal had been in place, then this sort of situation wouldn't be arising. So yeah, I fully support it.
Thank you. We can't go back in time and review them all. I mean, we will take some examples and examine the ones that we are aware of to set up a system to avoid it happening in future. Councillor Croker.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'd be happy to support this and probably to help with the work of the committee.
Thank you. We're taking notes of names. Councillor Bateman.
It's just to say, I think this is a wonderful idea. Totally support it. I would like us to make sure that we also look at where the district itself is the party that has made the commitments to provide the space as well, just so that we're not excluded from that scrutiny as well. Because there are instances where it's Horsham district themselves who've made promises but perhaps haven't fulfilled those.
Okay, I'm unaware of that, but I mean, it's a valid point. It's well made. I mean, usually these planning things are done between developers and ourselves and third parties, but I mean, there's nothing preventing including it in the scope. Any other comments? Okay, well, as I said, we will do this one after one of the other one finishes. The other thing I'd say is the work program in your item agenda number 11. Basically, you've got March and June. What I intend to do before then is I would like to set up certainly the task and finish group that using Councillor Walter's suggestion, and I will circulate both of these task and finishes to the wider council members for them to sort of put their names up, and then we will take it from there. Okay? Any questions on item 11? No? Item 12 on the agenda is Cabinet Forward Plan. I will take it that you've all read your documents and all the backing papers, and so I will just note these. Are there any topics coming up on the Cabinet Forward Plan that you think we should be looking at or call in? I mean, I've looked at it. What is your opinion, members of the members of the committee? Is there anything there that you think? I realise that we've been through a lot here tonight. Some of these are what I would call vanilla items, though not really worthwhile getting into great depth, but some you might feel it is worth looking at in greater depth. Over to you. No comments? No points to be raised? No? Okay, well, I will take it that then nothing more on that. Item 13, urgent business. I have no urgent business, so with those words, I will draw the meeting to a close. And I will thank you very much for coming and for being patient enough. It was a big agenda, but we did it under 2 hours. Thank you.